Good afternoon, YouTube. I thought I'd make a little cooking video today, a little bit of an instructional video on how to make, well, what we're going to be doing, or the dish of choice is going to be one of the most iconic French dishes, namely coq au vin. So we're going to be preparing literally what translates as rooster or chicken in wine. Now, traditionally seeing, this is indeed, as the name says, it was a way of cooking rooster or older chicken, basically to stew it, because usually, well, the older animals were a little bit too tough to be used as roasting. So they were stewed long time in a wine sauce that basically broke down the meat until it was tender enough to eat. What we'll be doing today is basically starting the whole dish from scratch, including making some fresh stock and basically cooking up a nice little hearty dish fit for the autumn weather of the moment. First thing we're gonna do is cut up our chicken, the main star of the dish. Now, for this recipe, you want to be using, well, a quality chicken. So not the cheapest kind in the supermarket, but a quality piece of chicken. And you want to be using indeed the whole animal. So we want the flavor from indeed legs, breast, anything that we can find. Now, first thing we have to do is, of course, cut up our chicken. Now, just to make a short demonstration what we have to do. So basically, you're going to cut into the thigh, pop out the joint, and thusly we can basically cut around the meat and thus separate, first of all, the legs. There we go. So we want this work to be as effortless as possible. Now you can feel here on the back there is the little back bone. Besides, what I'm using in this case, it's a boning knife, just because it's a very handy tool with a very sharp point that helps me greatly, but any large kitchen knife will do for this job. But we want to be feeling where the backbone is, and we basically want to try and pop through, there we go, the breastbone, just to separate the breast. And then we can basically cut along the fillet to basically cut out the fillet. Now, don't worry if there's still a little bit of bone to the bottom. Again, this is a stewing dish, so if this gets stuck, no problem. There we go. And now we're going to do the other side. So we again want to get as close to the bone as we can and cut down the meat. Again, don't worry if it's not one clean cut. It's going to be stewing, and up until the part where it, well, basically nearly falls apart. There we go. Two breasts, and of course also we want to try and pop out. So again, you feel where the joint is, and you're going to try and, there we go, pop out, damn it, the wing. There we go, one wing. And you can just try your best, there we go, that one was a little less effortless, to remove the extra meat, specifically for the stewing purpose. The carcass we will be reserving to make our stock. That's going to be our next port of call. So we're going to make our stock. So again, don't worry too much if it's not 100% clean or you have a few little scraps here and there. The meat will be stewed up until, well, basically it starts to come apart. Now what we can do furthermore is also trim the carcass apart. So advantage with a boning knife is that it has enough strength also to, if necessary, break through the rib cage, where another kitchen knife usually doesn't have the strength to do that. That's why I prefer using it. We'll try and pop through the back as well. There we go, break that in half, and we have a couple of pieces that we can stew up for stock. So that's basically our chicken broken down. Next thing, we're going to well, cut up some vegetables and try to make some stock. As you can see, we have some vegetables cut up. We have our carcass and we're about ready to make some stock. First thing what we're going to do is basically just throw in our pieces of carcass, voila, into our pot, and basically slightly brown the meat. Try also render out some of the fat that's still on the chicken, and try and make a solution in which we can brown our vegetables. As for a fattening agent, this is of course a French recipe, so we are trying to use only butter. But we're first going to start browning our chicken. Afterwards we can continue with our vegetables and our aromatic herb. Our pieces of chicken have had time to caramelize somewhat, gather some color, and it's now time to add in our veggies. So what we have here, it's basically a carrot, plastic stuff, an onion cut up, and the green parts of leek, and same thing goes for celery. So the green parts of a bit of celery. I love stock for the reason that basically you can throw in the parts that you couldn't really eat in any other way, but you can still use them to basically make some good stock. So this can now stand here and sweat for a few minutes. We'll also add in some more aromatics like a few sprigs of thyme, a few whole peppercorns, and a few, there we go, bay leaves, just to provide some extra flavor. Now we'll let the veggies sit for a few more minutes, and then we can move on to basically dousing everything in water. We're into day 2 of our recipe. So we've allowed our stock to sit overnight, and basically now we're reducing our stock to, well, as concentrated as we can. The idea of a good coq au vin is that you add some stock, but that it doesn't get too watery. You get mainly the liquid taste of the wine instead of water. So we're going to reduce this down to, well, about as reduced as I can get. Now what you'll be noticing across the entire recipe, we will be using only one pan, and we're not even going to clean it in between all the uses. That's not, well, some of it is, but that's not just me being lazy, but the idea being that you want to keep the flavors inside the pot and basically just keep on using it and building up again layer upon layer of flavor in the dish. We're ready for the next step. We are going to start browning our meat, and we have everything ready. So our mise en place, as they say it with a fancy word, has been done. So as for veggies, we have about a very large yellow onion, a small carrot, a few or 2 cloves of garlic, not really original in the recipe, but still I like it again. So we can start by adding the meat. First what we have is a few slices of homemade bacon, and of course our pieces of chicken, which we have coated in some flour. This is also going to help thicken the sauce. Now we're looking for making a pretty light consistency, not a very thick gloopy sauce. So but we're going to be adding and browning our chicken bit by bit, and when they are brown we can start sauteing our vegetables. Our meat has been properly browned. We just want to give it some color. The only thing that's left is I left 2 pieces that are basically just fat, just to render out some fat to, well, stew our vegetables in. So we're going to start out with our onions and carrots. And as you can see, there's already some crust forming on the bottom from the flour. Don't worry, as these onions start to sweat, this will start to deglaze, and it will deglaze even further as soon as, there we go, as soon as we put our wine in. And this is just all gonna provide some extra flavor to the dish. We can also add in a few sprigs of thyme, some bay leaves, and later on just voila, put some pepper and salt for extra flavor. So, as you can see, our vegetables have been sweating somewhat, so we can add our pieces of chicken back in, and we can start to finish off this dish. There we go. And please don't forget any of the juices. And now we can just finish off the dish with, well, simply our liquid. First of all, our reduced stock. So we're about 1 glass of stock and some red wine. Now, this is of course the main ingredient for the dish. It's also where it derives its name. However, there's a lot of discussion about, I think that should do it, about what type of wine to use. My own advice is always use a drinkable but cheap wine. My reasoning being, this is going to stew with a lot of very strong flavors for 2 hours. There is no use, or it won't do a lot of good to use a very expensive or very specific wine. In the end, the stew will taste like red wine, but not much more. You will not be able to taste whatever wine is in there. So use a cheap but drinkable wine, as cheap as you can get away with. Again, same thing with Belgian beer. So after 2 hours of stewing, you will have little taste other than it tastes like red wine. So why bother wasting your good bottle of Chateau Petrus or Chateau Lafite on something like this? Just use a simple drinkable wine. Now this will be covered, allowed to take some heat, and afterwards simmer for about 2 hours on very low heat, up until what point the chicken basically falls off the bone, and we will be ready to finish. We're about done. So the dish has been set to stew for a good 3 hours and has been allowed to cool as well for a few hours. Now it's just time to finish the sauce. So all we're gonna do is optional, but I do feel that it gives a more intense flavor. I add the last bit of my red wine, and we need some thickening agent. So I add some wine at the end, so I do believe that it provides a little bit more of an intense red wine flavor. But we're gonna let this boil in, and we're gonna use a thickening agent. Just to, as I said before, we don't want a super heavy sauce, but we do want some, or we do want some thickness to the sauce, that it will stick to our meat. What we're gonna be using as a thickening agent, this is some homemade, so to keep it in French style, some homemade beurre manier, or simply butter smashed together with some flour, which we're going to add bit by bit, allow to cook in and dissolve, and thus thicken up our sauce. So we will allow the sauce to cook through, reduce a little bit, and then we'll be ready to serve. This dish is perfect served as is, with some just with some mashed potatoes, croquettes if you like, even some rice, a few slices of fresh baguette, and a glass of red wine, and that's basically all you need for the best coq au vin you've ever tasted. The dish.